John tells you exactly why he wrote his gospel. Not at the beginning. At the end. John 20:30-31. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. He doesn't call them miracles, he calls them signs. That word choice is one of the most deliberate decisions in the entire New Testament, and if you read past it too fast, you miss the architectural logic of the whole gospel. Matthew, Mark, and Luke use the Greek word dynamis for Jesus' miraculous works. It means power or mighty deed. It emphasizes what happened, the raw force of the act. John almost never uses that word. Instead, he uses semeion, sign. 7 times across his gospel, John selects a miracle, calls it a sign, and arranges the 7 in a sequence so precise it reads less like a biography and more like a carefully constructed theological argument, because that's exactly what it is. A sign in the world John lived in was not the main event. A sign pointed beyond itself to something else. It's just as a road sign doesn't exist for its own sake. It exists to tell you where you are and where you're going. And John's 7 signs are not primarily demonstrations of Jesus' power. They are 7 pointers, 7 arrows, each one aimed at the same target. Who then is this target? The answer John builds toward, sign by sign, is the most explosive claim in all of human history. But just before we walk through the signs themselves, you need to feel the literary architecture John has constructed around them. John opens his gospel with the words, "In the beginning," enartia in Greek. The exact same opening as the book of Genesis in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. John is not doing that accidentally. He is signaling from his very first breath that this gospel is a creation account, a new Genesis. The first Genesis began with 7 days. John's gospel is structured around 7 signs. The connection is deliberate. The first creation was accomplished through the word of God spoken over darkness and chaos. John 1:1 tells you that the word, the Logos, was God. John 1:14 tells you that word became flesh. So the 7 signs are the new creation happening in real time. The Logos, who spoke light into existence at the beginning, is now walking through Galilee and Jerusalem, doing something equally fundamental. He is remaking what was broken. And each sign tells you something different about how. Sign 1. Water into wine. John 2:1-11. There was a wedding in Cana. The wine runs out and Jesus' mother tells him. He responds with a phrase that sounds dismissive in English, but is anything but in Greek. "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." That word hour, hora. It appears 7 times in John's Gospel at critical moments and always refers to the same thing, the crucifixion, the cross. The hour is coming, Jesus says, and it's not now. The first sign is already framed by the shadow of the last one. Jesus instructs servants to fill 6 stone jars with water. The text is precise about the jars. They were the jars used for Jewish purification rituals. The water inside them was ceremonially clean water set apart for washing, for ritual cleansing, and Jesus turns that water into wine, not ordinary wine. The master of the feast tastes it and is astonished. Everyone serves the good wine first, he says, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. Now here is what is buried inside that exchange. The 6 stone jars represent the entire system of Jewish ritual purity. 6 is the number of incompletion in Hebrew numerology. 7 is wholeness. Creation was completed on the 7th day. 6 falls 1 short. The purification system, the washings, the ritual cleansing, the whole elaborate architecture of making yourself acceptable before God through external observance, all of it captured in 6 jars that could never quite get you there. Jesus transforms what was inside them entirely. The wine is better than anything they'd had before. The master of the feast says, "The best has been kept until now." In John's Gospel, that phrase, "until now," is loaded. It points to the arrival of something that was always coming. The best wine of God's covenant purpose has been held in reserve. And now, the one who was in the beginning with God, through whom all things were made, is standing in a wedding courtyard in Galilee. Now is when the best wine comes. John 2:11 records the response of the disciples. They believed in him. The first sign produces the first believing. That's the pattern. Every sign in this gospel is a door into faith, not a performance of power. Sign 2. The healing of the nobleman's son. John 4:46-54. A royal official, a basilikos in Greek, comes to Jesus because his son is dying. He begs Jesus to come down and heal the boy. And Jesus does something unexpected. He doesn't go. He says, "Go, your son will live." And the man believes the word that Jesus spoke and goes. That's it. No dramatic journey to the bedside, no laying on of hands, no proximity whatsoever. The boy is healed at the exact moment Jesus speaks the word, while his father is still on the road. The servants confirm it when the official arrives home. Now feel the escalation from sign 1. At Cana, Jesus was physically present. He was at the wedding. He spoke to the servants. He touched the situation. Here, he heals across distance. The healing travels without him. The word is enough. In Hebrew thought, the creative word of God, the dabar, was not just communication, it was action. Genesis 1 doesn't say God thought light into existence, he spoke it. Dabar was the vehicle of divine creative power. What God speaks happens. The gap between the word and the reality is 0. The second sign is establishing that Jesus' word operates with the same authority as the creative word of Genesis. Distance is irrelevant. The word carries the power. You don't need to be standing next to Jesus for what he says to be true. The official believes before he sees the healing. He takes Jesus at his word and walks home. And John 4:53 records that he and his whole household believed. The sign isn't the healing. The healing is the sign. What it's pointing to is the authority of his word. Sign 3. The healing at the pool of Bethesda. John 5:1-15. 38 years. That number is not incidental. Deuteronomy 2:14 records that Israel wandered in the wilderness for 38 years between Kadesh Barnea and the Zered Valley. 38 years of suspended promise, a whole generation circling in the desert waiting for what God had said was coming. A man has been lying by the pool of Bethesda for 38 years, unable to get into the water when it stirs because there is no one to help him. And Jesus asks him a question that on the surface sounds unnecessary. Do you want to be healed? Of course he wants to be healed. He's been there 38 years. But the question is not random, because the man's answer reveals that he has placed all his hope in the mechanism, in the stirring of the water, in being first, in the system working correctly. He doesn't answer Jesus' question. He explains why the system hasn't worked for him yet. Jesus bypasses the system entirely. Rise, take up your bed, and walk. The pool of Bethesda, whose name means house of mercy or house of grace depending on the Hebrew reading, was ironically a place where mercy was rationed. Only one person healed per stirring. First come, first served. The lame man who has been waiting longer than almost anyone will always lose that race. Jesus doesn't stir the water. He speaks the word, and 38 years of waiting ends in a sentence. But here's where most readers miss. The healing happens on the Sabbath. And when the Jewish leaders challenge the healed man for carrying his mat on the Sabbath, he points to Jesus. And Jesus says in verse 17, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." That statement nearly gets him killed on the spot. Not because he healed someone on the Sabbath, because he called God his own Father, making himself equal with God. The sign of healing is the doorway. The claim about his identity is the destination. Sign 4. Feeding 5,000, John 6:1-14. This is the only miracle that appears in all 4 Gospels, which should tell you it carries enormous weight. 5,000 people, 5 loaves, 2 fish, 12 baskets of leftover fragments. Every detail in John's account is deliberate. John tells you the Passover was near. That timing is not background information. Passover was the annual commemoration of God feeding his people in the wilderness, of the manna from heaven, of God providing bread in a place where there was no bread. John is placing this sign inside the frame of Exodus on purpose. And Jesus, before distributing anything, takes the bread, gives thanks, and distributes it himself. The Greek word for gives thanks is Eucharistesis, from which we get Eucharist. John is layering this moment with Passover, with Exodus, with communion, all at once. But the sign isn't the mechanism, it's what Jesus says the morning after. John 6:35. "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst." This is the first of John's 7 I am statements. Ego eimi in Greek. Ego eimi ho artos tes zois. I am the bread of life. And the phrase ego eimi is not just a self-identification. In John's Gospel, it carries the weight of Exodus 3:14, where God reveals his name to Moses at the burning bush. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. I am who I am. The name that means self-existent, eternally present, the one who simply is. Every I am statement in John is a deliberate echo of the divine name. Jesus is not just claiming to be the source of spiritual bread. He is claiming to be the one who gave the manna in the wilderness, the one who fed Israel for 40 years, the one whose name was spoken from a burning bush. The crowd fed by 5 loaves in a Galilean field is standing inside a Sinai moment, and most of them walk away when they realize what he's claiming. If you're finding value in this kind of deep reading of John's Gospel, the best way to support it is to subscribe and share this with someone who loves the Bible. That's genuinely how more people find content like this. Sign 5. Walking on water. John 6:16-21. The disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee at night. A storm rises, the sea is rough, and they see Jesus walking toward them on the water. Now, most readers focus on the miracle of water walking, and yes, that's staggering. But John's account contains a detail that Matthew and Mark's accounts make more of, and understanding it changes everything. When Jesus reaches the boat, John 6:20 records his words, "It is I, do not be afraid." In English, that reads as simple self-identification. It's me, calm down. But the Greek is ego eimi, the same phrase, I am, do not be afraid. And now, reach back into the Hebrew Scriptures. Job 9:8 says of God, "He alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea." Isaiah 43:2 says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." And in verse 10 of that same chapter, God says, "Before me no God was formed, nor shall there be any after me. I, I am he. Ego eimi in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures. The exact same phrase. The fifth sign is not primarily about defying physics. It's about identity revealed through a storm. The one walking on the Galilean water is the one Job said tramples the waves. The disciples who wanted to take him into the boat immediately found themselves at the shore. The chaos didn't stop him. The dark didn't slow him. The water that destroyed in Genesis 7, that swallowed Pharaoh's army in Exodus 14, that Job said only God could walk on. He walks on it, and he says, I am, while doing it. Sign 6, the man born blind. John 9:1-41. This sign carries one of the most important distinctions in the entire gospel. The disciples see the blind man and ask Jesus a question that reveals how their world worked. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Their assumption is embedded in the question. Suffering is punishment. Disability is divine judgment. If something is wrong with you, someone did something wrong. Find the sin, find the cause, assign the blame. Jesus dismantles the entire framework in a single sentence. It was not that this man sinned or that his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. The Greek word for displayed is phanero, to make visible, to reveal. This man has been living in darkness since birth, not as divine punishment, but as the precise location where God intends to make himself visible. And then Jesus does something John records in no other healing. He spits on the ground, makes mud, and puts it on the man's eyes, sends him to wash in the pool of Siloam. The mud from the ground. To understand this, we need to reach back to Genesis 2:7. The Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. The same Hebrew word, afar, dust, soil, ground. Jesus is using ground to give sight to eyes that were never formed correctly. This is not a healing. This is a recreation, a second forming. The one who made man from dust in Genesis 2 is making functional eyes from the same material in John 9, and he does it on the Sabbath, again. Because John needs you to feel the confrontation between Jesus and the religious establishment escalating toward its climax. The healed man is interrogated, his parents are interrogated, and the Pharisees' conclusion is stunning in its self-defeating logic. This man cannot be from God because he healed on the Sabbath. They have built a system so rigid that when the God they worship shows up and creates new eyes out of dirt, their system tells them he can't be from God. And Jesus says in verse 39, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. The man who was physically blind now sees. The men who claimed spiritual sight are now revealed to be blind. The sign performs a theological inversion in real time. The sixth sign isn't just about eyes. It's about what kind of blindness is actually dangerous. Sign 7, the raising of Lazarus, John 11:1-44. Everything in John's Gospel has been building here. 7 is the number of completion. The seventh day was rest. The seventh sign is resurrection. And the stakes are absolute. This is not a sick man, not a chronic condition, not a paralyzed man at a pool. Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days. The detail is deliberate. In Jewish belief, the soul lingered near the body for 3 days after death. By day 4, the soul had departed fully. The body had begun to decay. Lazarus is not in some intermediate state of near death. He is completely, irreversibly, 4 days in the tomb dead. Martha says in verse 39, Lord, by now he stinketh. That is the King James translation, and somehow the bluntness of it is exactly right. This is not the territory of resuscitation. This is decay. And before Jesus does anything, he weeps. The Greek verb is epikresin. It's one of the most discussed words in the New Testament because it appears only here. It doesn't mean the ugly public weeping of grief. It means tears falling quietly, a personal, private overflow of emotion. Jesus is standing at the tomb of his friend, fully aware of what he is about to do, and he cries anyway. Why? If he knows what's about to happen, why the tears? Because his weeping is not confusion about the outcome, it's solidarity with the suffering of the people standing around him. He sees Mary weeping, he sees the people who came with her weeping, and verse 33 says he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. The Greek is an ebrimisado, and his pneuma and a taraxin hauton, two violent words. Deeply moved describes an agitation like an angry groan. Troubled describes a self-willed shaking, like someone steeling themselves. Jesus doesn't float serenely above human suffering. He enters it, he groans in it, he cries at the edge of a tomb, even when he is about to empty it. And then he says three words that are the summit of everything John has been building toward. John 11:43, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man walks out. But the sign is not the walking. The sign is what Jesus said to Martha 4 verses earlier, before he ever called Lazarus out of the tomb. John 11:25-26. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live, and everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? I am the resurrection and the life. Not I will give resurrection. Not I can produce life. I am it. Resurrection is not something Jesus performs. It's something Jesus is. The seventh sign isn't the demonstration of a power Jesus possesses. It's the unveiling of a reality Jesus embodies. Death is not the final word, because the one standing at the tomb is himself the answer to death. Now take a moment and look at what John has constructed. John is not writing a collection of impressive stories. Every sign extends the boundary of what is possible for Jesus one stage further until the final sign eliminates the last boundary of all. And then consider this. John records 7 signs before the resurrection. But there is an 8th. After the resurrection, in John 21, Jesus appears on the shore while the disciples are fishing and have caught nothing. He tells them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. They catch 153 fish and the net doesn't break. John 21:14 calls it the third appearance of the risen Jesus. But the act itself, the miraculous catch, mirrors the very first calling of the disciples in other Gospels. It's a sign of beginning, of recommissioning, of starting again. The number 153 has generated centuries of biblical reflection. Jerome noted it was the sum of every integer from 1 to 17. Augustine connected it to the fullness of the catch, every kind of fish. Whatever the precise significance, the net holds. It doesn't break under the weight. And that is the final sign of the gospel. After everything, after the cross, after the tomb, after the resurrection, the work the disciples were called to do from the beginning, still possible. The net still holds. Now here is the deepest layer of the whole structure. John tells you in chapter 20:30 that Jesus performed many other signs not recorded in this book. John had access to more. He chose 7. He chose these 7. Which means the selection itself is a theological act. John is not just reporting, he is arranging, he is building something. And what he builds is a gospel that forces a decision. The purpose statement in 2031 is not passive. These are written so that you may believe. Pisteuit in Greek. Present tense, active, continuous. Not so that you will have believed at some point in the past, so that you keep believing, so that the believing becomes ongoing, lived, sustained. Every sign in John is written for you, not for the crowd that tasted the wine, or the man who walked out of Bethesda, or the people who ate the loaves. For you, sitting with this text, centuries later, trying to decide what you think about this man. And John arranges the signs so that the question gets harder and harder to avoid. By the time you reach sign 7, by the time you have watched Jesus stand at a 4-day tomb and weep and say, "I am the resurrection," and then call a dead man by name and watch him walk out, the question John 11:26 asks is the same one the whole gospel has been building toward. Do you believe this? Not believe it happened. Believe it means what he said it means, that the one standing at the tomb is himself the answer to life and death. That's the question 7 signs were written to create. Because here's what John knew that the other gospel writers were not focused on in the same way. People don't ultimately need more evidence. They need a decision made possible by the right evidence. The signs don't compel faith. They create the conditions for it. The nobleman at Capernaum still had to walk home on Jesus' word before he saw the healing. The man at Bethesda still had to pick up his mat and stand. The disciples at the empty tomb still had to choose what to do with the folded burial cloths. Every sign in John has that structure. The miracle is real. The power is undeniable. And then a door opens, and you have to walk through it. John 20:29. Jesus said to Thomas, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." That blessing is for you. It always was. 7 signs, written, arranged, aimed like arrows at a single moment, the moment you decide what you believe about who Jesus is. If the Gospel of John has blessed you today, subscribe and share this with someone. Leave a comment, even a single word. That's genuinely how more people find this kind of content, and we'll keep going deeper. God bless.